Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support me on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie, all one word. And I have weekly bonus episodes on there of everything else I'm watching. And I want to take a moment to thank my top patrons. They are Jeff Widman, Philip Barker, Michael Cross, and Josh Johnson. Thank you guys for keeping the lights on. And if you like what you hear today, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. Well, I have a returning voice on the podcast that you've heard a few times. I have John Rodgers on here. Say hi, John.
Hi, John. Old joke, but I'm a dad. So what can I
Welcome
say?
back. Love it. Love it. You have come on the show several times, and you're very active in our Facebook group, giving us the weekly Turner Classic movie lineup.
Yeah, that's something I enjoy doing. It's since I've retired from teaching, it gives me an excuse to do a little bit of writing every week. And even though I've done so many of them now, I'm able to copy and paste from former listings of those films a lot of times, including the one we're about to talk about.
Yes. Yeah, I was gonna say, since you just talked about teaching, I guess this movie choice is close to your heart. And if you guys haven't listened to an episode before, I always let the guests pick the movie. So, John, what movie did you choose to talk about today?
The 1939 version of Goodbye, Mr. Chips, an MGM production. One of the MGM productions that they did in England, they opened up a British studio because as World War II was getting cranked up, the Brits didn't want to lose business and
Mm.
MGM get cut out, so they established a sort of a partnership with the British film industry to operate an MGM studio there.
I did not realize that. That's very cool. Yeah, so this is Goodbye, Mr. Chips. I have not seen this movie before, um, but I really enjoyed it. And I do want to let our listeners know that if you have not seen this movie, you may want to pause and rent it. You can rent it on iTunes, by the way. But the synopsis of it is that it's about an aged teacher and a former headmaster of a boarding school recalling his career and personal life over the decades. So it's one of those movies that like starts sort of in reverse, like at the end of the movie, and when the whole movie is like about his life. So John, when did you first see this movie?
I don't remember, honestly, don't. But I have a love for teacher movies. In fact, when I did my midlife career change uh, to from retail management to go into teaching, uh, I did look
Oh, I
at
didn't know
several
that.
teacher movies, and yeah, and kind of. Yeah, I know that in real life, teaching isn't like it is in the movies, but sometimes it is. And I just fell in love with this story. Plus, I'm a fan of classic movies anyway. And this came out in 1939, which is
Mhm.
probably the most classic of classic movie years. And,
Yeah.
that was the year of Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz and Adventures of Robin Hood and Stagecoach, which made John Wayne a star. All that and many more were 1939. And Robert Donat, who
Good point.
played Mr. Chips, won the Best Actor Oscar, beating out Clark Gable in Gone with the Wind and James Stewart in
Wow.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So he had some heady competition that year.
Yeah, yeah. I had a couple of quick facts that I wrote down too, just a couple. One of them was that Greer Garson's performance is only 25 minutes of the movie, and yet she received an Oscar nomination in the Best Actress category. It's one of the shortest performances to have been nominated.
Yes, back then and it wasn't until really the last, I don't know, 25 or 30 years that time the time that was on screen played as much of a uh, factor in which category you got nominated in. She was pretty much the
Hmm,
only actress in this film, so therefore she was an actress in a leading role. And
that's
this was
true.
her screen debut, and she obviously acquitted herself very well and became a star.
Yeah, I mean, like she doesn't have a ton of screen time, but she does make a pretty big impact in the movie, so that's kind of understandable. Another fact that I had was that this is adapted from the 1934 novella Goodbye, Mr. Chips. James Hilton based the character of Mr. Chips on W.H. Balgarny, his older classics master who taught for over 50 years at the Leys Public School in Cambridge.
And I have read the book. I have a paperback copy in a box someplace. I've
Oh,
thought
really?
of digging it out and reading it again before we had our discussion, but I wasn't that industrious. Uh, yeah, the book,
No worries.
again, called a novella, it's much like the movie, it's very episodic. It's almost a collection of short stories as much as it is a
Hmm.
novel, while you have the continuing storyline, much like, say, Mr. Holland's Opus, another wonderful teacher movie, is episodes in this guy's life
Hmm.
uh, that are
Yeah.
brought together by his uh, association with the school.
Yeah, yeah. And this film, I kind of wondered about it as I was watching it, but it takes place between 1870 to 1933.
Yes, I think Donat's character, Mr. Chipping, ages from like age 25 to 80 or something like that. There's a reason I didn't teach math. I haven't done that math. But yes, it
Oh
does
yeah, I
start.
don't I don't know
Uh,
either.
it does start uh, pretty much towards the end of Queen Victoria and goes all the way through just before World War II, with an emphasis on the war years during World War One, which was a major factor in that. And that's another parallel. I'm probably getting ahead of myself here, but parallel between this movie, Goodbye, Mr. Chips, and Mr. Holland's Opus. They both have an episode in them in which the teacher character mourns a student who was lost in the war. Mr. Chips,
Oh,
the
interesting.
one of the collies, and Mr. Holland, the Terrence Howard character who was lost in Vietnam. There's a lot of parallels
Yeah,
there. So if you've
yeah.
seen Mr. Holland's Opus and kind of want to see where that kind of storytelling comes from, this is where to go.
Man, I haven't seen that movie in such a long time, Mr. Holland's Opus. I remember seeing it. I think I saw it in theaters. Um Yeah, so this was directed by Sam Wood, who I'm not super familiar with, if I'm honest, but when I looked at his IMDb page, like he did tons of movies.
Yeah, he was one of MGM's journeyman directors, say, and he was he was an American who they sent to England to help start this British
Oh,
division of
okay.
MGM Studios.
Yeah. And you mentioned already that it stars Robert. How do you spell how do you pronounce his last name?
Donat. It's like donut, but with an
Donat.
A.
Okay, so
Donat.
Robert
And the only reason I know that is from
so
watching Turner Classic Movies and hearing Mankiewicz pronounce it.
Nice. I felt like you would know. But yeah, Robert Donat and Greer Garson are the main stars. Do you recognize any other like familiar faces in the movie?
Yeah, one, Paul Heinried, a few years before he really impressed us in Casablanca, which is a movie you and I have talked about before. Um, this was,
That's
if
true.
not his first one of his first films, or at least first English speaking film. And he played a
Mm.
German professor that was one of Chipping's colleagues and was indirectly responsible for Chipping to meet Kathy, the Greer Garson character, which obviously had a very huge impact on Chip's life and course of events that follow him throughout his career.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you want to talk about next? Do you want to talk about some of your favorite scenes from the movie?
Yeah, sure. When the movie begins, Chipping is and if you like Harry Potter movies, this will all seem kind of familiar. He's arriving at the train station where the special train is
Oh,
taking all
right.
these students to this English boarding school, much like the platform 9.5 or whatever it is in the Potter movies, except there's no wizardry going
Mhm.
on here. And
No, just
he is
academia.
as green as the grass in our yards outside. This is his first teaching job, and as it turns out, it would be the only teaching job he ever has. And uh, he gets on the train and shares a compartment with about six boys. One of them is the first collie. I got to explain something. There's a Since this is a multi generational story, one of the ways they show the passage of time
Mhm.
is to feature the different characters and the different clothing and hairstyles that they had. But they did a neat trick that there's this one
Yeah.
family who always sent their sons to Brookfield School, and their name was
Mhm.
Collie. And the first Collie was John Conley, Collie, John Conley, that was the governor of Texas. John Collie, who later on in the movie is Sir John Collie, um, and but they had the same
Oh.
kid actor play all the Collies. First he's John Collie, and then he's Peter Collie, the first, the second, and the third at the very end of the movie, which gives us our most heart touching moment. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So yeah, Chipping gets on the train. Uh, these students are all excited for school. They're all, if you've ever been in and these boys are probably middle school age, most of them. And so they're very excited. And there's this one little boy that's in the compartment that is already homesick. And Chipping tries to comfort the boy. And the other boys are distracted by something else. And the new boy starts to cry. And the other boys turn around and assume that Chipping has uh, upset the boy in some way when actually all he was trying to do was to comfort the boy. And so he kind of gets off on the wrong foot. Um, First day of school, and I've been there. Believe me, you learn how to maintain order in the classroom. Chipping doesn't have those skills yet. They kind of run over him, and as punishment, he decides to keep them in the classroom when the big cricket match is going on, which makes the boys' resentment towards him even more so, but they know now not to mess with him. So for a good chunk of the movie at the beginning, uh, he's seen as a no nonsense disciplinarian, and and along the way, and it's actually in the timeline about 20 years later, he and the German professor go on a vacation to Austria. And so that's
Oh,
already 20. That is as long as I taught, again, because I was late into the business, but that was 20 years was, was about all of it I could take, which I'm glad I put that on the second half of my working life. But yeah, that's already 20 years. And they very cleverly aged Chipping. Uh, I think Donette was approaching 30 himself when the filming happened. And at first he's clean shaven and fresh faced. And by the time they get to the Austria scenes, he's sporting a mustache and maybe just a little touch of gray in his hair. And for uh, the time, the makeup artists do an admirable job of making him look
yeah,
older without it looking fake, in my opinion. Anyway, so they go to
I
Austria.
agree.
Yeah, they Chipping and the German professor, who's I think his name is Stossel, uh, go on this walking tour of Austria, where on a foggy evening he's up in the highlands and he hears a woman's voice calling out, and he's afraid that there's somebody in trouble, so he climbs on up the mountain where he one of the best meet cute scenes in any rom-com meets Greer Garson, who's this young woman. She was not in
Mm,
trouble. She was just calling out to hear the echo of her own voice and stuff like that. But they immediately hit it off. And this middle section is their brief time in Austria. And at the end of the Austrian vacation, they decide to marry, even though he's like 20 years older than she. She's supposed to be about 25. He's supposed to be about 40 or so at this point. And so they decide to marry. And she awakens something in him. He had kind of suppressed his own emotions and personality for so long to be this disciplinarian that
yeah.
she awakens sense of humor and his love of life. And so she comes back to Brookfield with him, where she immediately charms the children. She starts having groups of boys come to their house every Sunday for tea and biscuits, as they call it. And gets to be very popular, and the other teachers love her to death as well. And as that at that point,
Yeah.
Chipping starts harboring hopes that someday he would be headmaster of the school. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, but the scene where they meet on the mountain, and this then a few minutes later, the scene at the train station when she goes back to England, back to London, and he's going back to Brookfield, and they decide to get married. And what's funny is the Stossel character, Paul Heinrich's character, he and Kathy's uh, lady friend, a traveling companion, have already started making the plans for the wedding even before they had.
Oh,
Uh, yeah, it was like everybody saw that they were so much in love even before they realized it. Uh, uh, so unfortunately, Kathy is not with us very long. I'll kind of leave that alone. Uh, don't want to, and uh, but yeah, she does pass away, and uh, so the rest of the film is Chipping as he grows older, and he gets passed over for the headmaster job several times, for uh, various
yeah.
politics, his uh, at first inability to maintain discipline and then being too much of a disciplinarian, whatever. And and you're asking about favorite scenes. The new headmaster in the early 1900s comes in. By this time, Chipping is grayed, and he's got this huge Mark Twain mustache, and he always wears his academic
Mhm.
robe while he's on campus, and his mortarboard, even though by this time most of the professors aren't doing that anymore. He still clings to those old traditions, but
Yeah.
his gown is worn out. It doesn't even hang across his shoulders properly. Uh, and that's another neat trick they use to make it look like he's aging. Was a very handsome, broad-shouldered young man, and now it seems that his shoulders aren't even wide enough to properly hold up this academic gown he wears.
Yeah.
And the new headmaster has this talk with him, saying, "It's about time for you to retire. Uh, people make fun of your robes. They make fun of the old-fashioned way that you teach Latin, blah, blah, all this." And this is when Sir John Colley, who was one of the kids at the very beginning and by now has had son and grandson come through uh, the school, uh, well, he's on the board of trustees. And so the board of trustees stick up for Mr. Chipping, and he's allowed to stay until about 4 or 5
Yeah.
years later. He does retire, but he lives on a little cottage just outside of the campus. And that's when World War I breaks out. And
Right.
uh, because so many of the teachers and administrators have to go do their military service, he's called back and finally gets to be the headmaster during the war years.
Yeah.
And heartbreaking scene. Again, this kind of was reflected to me in Mr. Holland's opus with the funeral scene of the former student that had become a soldier. Uh, Chipping reads the Roll of Honor every week to the students in the General Assembly, and uh, among them was I think the second Colley, and also Strassel, Chipping's friend, who
Mm-hmm.
had when the war had started, had gone back to uh, Austria and had fought on the sides of the Germans. And the students think it's odd that he would be reading a German name in the Roll of Honor, but he wasn't. Uh, he was honoring his friend, and that man was serving his country as much as the Englishmen were serving theirs. And that was an interesting thing too, because it's 1939. World War II is getting started. Everybody knows it's going to happen. And I saw a thing about Warner Brothers the other night, and Warner Brothers was really wanting to add to the anti-German sentiment,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and with the Confessions of a Nazi Spy and Casablanca, even, and MGM kind of skirts around the issue in this movie with that particular scene.
Yeah.
The war ends, and Chipping does retire for good this time. And uh, near the end, some of the boys, the latest Collie, as a freshman student there, and they think they're pulling a prank on him by sending him to knock on Chipping's door. And this is my scene. And Chipping
Oh.
opens the door. Little Collie says, "Here I am, Mr. Chipping." And Chipping doesn't know what's going on, but he sees the other boys peeking around the corner and realizes that they're doing a little bit of hazing on this young boy. So he invites the boy in. He doesn't realize that he's a Collie yet. And they have a nice little tea and biscuit session. And also leads up to the wonderful final line, which is the title of the book, "Goodbye, Mr. Chips." And so,
Yeah.
yeah, just a lot of little episodes, uh, not necessarily a continuous narrative thread, um, but
Yeah.
here's a sample of his life in the 1890s. Here's a sample of his life in the 1920s, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how the book was written, as well as these little short vignettes.
Yeah, I was really struck by in this movie just he had such a long life, and every time you think his life is going into a certain direction, it seems to take another one, and I feel like that's exactly how life is.
Yep, that's a fact. You and I both in the last couple of years have had curveballs thrown us that we've managed to work through, and uh,
Mhm.
mhm. and
Good point.
uh,
Yeah, I mean,
glad you're
it's
here.
kind of teased in the yeah, same. Yeah, we shouldn't forget how lucky we are to be here. So true. I I thought it was interesting, like, when you meet, Mr. Chips, his, future wife, but you know that in the present she's not around. So, like, it's kind of like, that there's gonna be a tragedy. Um, it doesn't make
Yeah,
that when that happens in the film any less impactful, but, that happens, and then, like you said, she pumps him up about how she sees him becoming a headmaster. And then that doesn't happen. And for a while I'm like, oh, okay, I guess that's not gonna happen. And then World War One happens, and then he's pulled back in, and then he eventually does become headmaster. But it's just like that really is kind of how life is, right? Where it's like you have a trajectory, and then you get a curveball, like you said, and then you do a few things for a few years, he comes back. It's just so interesting. Like he lives such a long time in the film, um,
yeah,
but he lives such a full life, even though it doesn't go the way he wants it to. It still comes across as like a very wonderful life that he lived.
indeed. I think one of the reasons that Kathy's demise hits us so hard is because of Greer Garson and her performance. She is just so, well, I mean,
Hmm.
obviously very pretty, and but her character is just such a lovely character. She captures our hearts the way she captures the boys and the other teachers, uh, and there's nothing not likable about her, and so when she's suddenly gone from us, it
Yeah.
does hit hard, even though you can see it coming a mile off. uh, it's just part of it, and but again, in the hands of another actress, it might not have hit us so hard. Again, she just
I
did a
agree.
wonderful job of playing that character. Yeah, I wanted to see her stick around a lot longer because she was just so lovely and such a wonderful lady to be around.
Yeah, and Mr. Chips comes across as very much a one woman man. I mean, he even expresses, like, when they meet, he's very awkward. He hasn't, like you kind of mentioned before, he was so focused on his career. It's like he didn't really know how to, like, connect with women. So, like, if they hadn't gotten stuck on that mountain together, it probably never would have happened. And I also felt like watching that scene that was like the start of a trope, Like, there's so many movies where people are like stuck in an elevator or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, they're stuck in a situation where they have to connect, and but it works so well in this movie. And um yeah, she's just so lovely. So when she's gone, you're like, what is he going to do? But, like, he goes on to live a long life, and then at the end of his life, I told you, probably you asked me if I cried watching it, and I think at the end, when he overhears someone say, "Oh, it's so sad, he, like, never had any kids," and then he makes a comment like, um, something to the effect of, like, I did have kids. I had thousands of them, all boys," and I thought that was just so touching.
And that gets me every time. I probably watch this film. Well, it pops up on Turner 3 or 4 times a year, and I'll probably watch it at least once a year, perhaps twice a year. And it was on, which was what prompted me to contact you last week. I was watching it last week, and I was still wiping the tears out of my eyes when I sent you that message. Uh, I just,
Aw.
to quote a phrase, I love that movie, and again, he is so believable, and again, I mean, the performance is so believable, and they did such a good job of the makeup and the way he carried himself and the way he walked around again, he was a very nice looking young man, but by the time he's the old man at the end, he's kind of shuffling around, very small steps, which I'm learning about myself these days, and uh, uh, they fit his clothes so they look like they hung off of him more, and again the Mark Twain mustache and the wig. Even I've seen
Mhm.
so many movie makeup jobs from back in where they just painted wrinkles on them, and you can tell. And they did wrinkle his face. I don't know if they were using latex then or not, but it does to me it does not look fake. You got to remember this is also in black and white, which I know turns a lot of our listeners off, but it was
Shouldn't
filmed
though.
in black and white, and but so that probably helped with it a lot. But it didn't look like grease paint. It looked like the lines in his forehead and around his eyes. He kind of had an Albert Einstein look to him in the later scenes.
He does. Yeah, and I feel like like you said, they kind of let his performance be what ages him, and instead of the makeup, like you said, relying too heavy on it. So, like, I think in a modern under a modern lens, he doesn't look 80, but he certainly is playing the character like he's 80. So you get the gist, and it looks pretty good for back then. I agree. And yeah, that ending scene is very moving to me because I think it highlights like a personal, um I guess, like, belief that I have, that like so many things in life are not permanent, but it's like that. I think it's a Maya Angelou quote. People won't remember what you did or what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And definitely Mr. Chips had such an impact on his students. I mean, it's like he was beloved. You could tell, like, in the scene when he retires the first time. He
Right.
has that gift from the students, and the students fight for him and they care about him, and it's because they can tell he genuinely cares about them. And I don't think he would have had the longevity in his career or the connection with those students if not for his wife. I think she brought that out of him, and it changed who he was going forward. He became like this very warm and like loving person that everyone at the end of the movie really connects with.
Indeed, and there's a scene in there that shows his skill as a teacher and as just a person who's in tune with what the students are feeling. There's a scene during the World War I sequence where they have to go down in the cellar, uh, lower school as they call it, because of a bomb raid. And
Mhm.
instead of just sitting down there and huddling, he has them take out their Latin books and they read a section from Julius Caesar about when he fought uh,
Oh, yeah.
against Germanic tribes in Gaul, and and uses that as a teachable moment. But also, by this time, he has developed a pretty good sense of humor, and so he was able to use that to his advantage to ease the boys' fear about what was going on just outside the building that they were in. And so, yeah, he's more than just do the assignment on page 57 guy. He gets really in tune with the kids, which is also shown again. My very favorite scene is that almost the last scene where the youngest collie calls on him. He immediately picks up that here's a scared little boy. Was kind of, now that I think about it, ties it all the way back to that first scene on the train when he tries to comfort that boy and obviously doesn't know how to do it. But in the last scene where he makes Collie feel at home and not scared of being at this big foreboding institution that is Brookfield College,
Mhm.
uh, that he has developed those skills and obviously used them to great advantage. Uh,
Yeah.
like I said, it's just one of a number of teacher. I think I posted a list on the Facebook page a few weeks ago of favorite teacher movies, and this is definitely
Oh,
one
that's
of
that's a
them.
good
But it
idea.
wasn't really until earlier today that I realized that it's much like Mr. Holland's opus in that it covers a long period of time and has these separate incidents throughout.
Yeah, I don't think I realized that either. but it just, yeah, I like the way they use like the different historical markers to show the passage of time and the time that the character is alive. Like so much happens in his lifetime, which is really interesting.
Oh, for sure. Uh,
Yeah.
and and what's interesting too is while this is set in Britain and England and an English boarding school, which you and I we don't have much except for Harry Potter movies, maybe don't have much of a connection to. But we've all had teachers, we've all been students, and some of those teachers we've gotten along with, and some of them we have not. And Chipping managed through the course of his lifetime to be both of those.
Yeah,
Uh,
very true.
and One other actor, you asked about actors I recognize. There's only one other actor whose name I
Mhm.
recognize. Collie as a young man, I believe it's when he's a soldier getting ready to ship out, uh, was played by John Mills, who was
Okay.
an English actor, and but he did some stuff over here. But he was also the father of Haley Mills, who was in the original Parent Trap. She played the twins, and that John Mills was her father. The last thing I
Oh.
saw him in was the musical Cats. There's a DVD version of it, not the bad movie that came out a couple years ago, but the stage show, and he played the old theater cat in the London production of that. It's
Oh,
one of the
really?
last things he did. Yeah, and which is my favorite part of Cats is I don't can't imagine why, uh, but this old actor cat who played in thousands of roles, and but that he was in that, but he was in quite a few things, both mainly in England, but some things over here. John Mills uh, played
Yeah.
one of the middle collies. The boy that played Collie, I can't remember his name. Hang on, but he did kind of the young man that played all the Terry Kilburn was his name. Uh, the only other thing I know about him, he was Tiny Tim in one of the old versions of A Christmas Carol. Uh, but I understand he had a pretty long career, mainly as a kid actor, but then later on. Uh, and I think he's the only one of this whole cast is still with us.
Oh,
But he
wow.
did an amazing job because all the collies had different personalities, even though the same kid played them. The first one was one of the malcontents in Chipping's earliest class, and in the middle, he gets into a fight with that collie. Gets into a fight with another kid who was supposedly not of the same class, and they wind up being best friends because of Chipping's influence. And then at the end, he's the scared little newbie who accidentally comes to visit Mr. Chips at the very end. And every one of those characters was uh, had his own personality, and uh,
Oh, that's so
so
interesting.
he did a fine job for being a probably only a 10, 11, 12-year old kid playing these four roles.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Yeah, it's like you don't see that very often in a movie where like the same actor is playing different roles like that.
Definitely an old style of filmmaking. The acting, while wonderful, at the same time is not exactly stagey, but it's not. Yeah, yeah. Uh,
Yeah, it's not
the
like
acting
super
itself is not
real.
exactly. It's not super real, but it's not stagey either. They're not playing to the back rows the way a
Yeah,
lot
it's
of
kind of in between.
uh, films had. Yeah, and but like I do when I watch a silent film, say I just kind of unhook my mind from 2023 and just enter the world
Right.
of the film.
I
So
agree.
yeah. So this movie
Yeah,
obviously
it's a
works
good
for
point.
me.
I
It might
mean,
not work for everybody, but uh, it, it talks to me again because of my uh, profession, but uh, at the same time, it's just a neat story. Yeah, Robert Donat was
oh,
34 years old when they filmed it, uh, and he ages 63 years over the course of the film. So again,
oh
thank you,
wow.
IMDb. He says, as soon as I put that mustache on, I felt the part, even if I did look like a great Airedale come out of a puddle. Airedale Terrier dog.
Yeah, he well, it sounds like his award was much deserved.
Well, again, look what he was up against. So Jimmy
Yeah.
Stewart, one of his signature roles, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and of course Clark Gable, uh, Gone with the Wind.
Mhm.
Everybody thought Gone with the Wind won every other Academy Award that year except that one, practically. Mickey
Yeah.
Rooney was nominated, but you know, you can take Mickey Rooney and go somewhere else with him. I never did like that guy. uh,
That's interesting. I was going to say that uh, it brings me to my last couple of questions for you, and the first one is just that how would you sum up this movie? Why do you think you've seen it so many times? What about it keeps drawing you back?
well, again, it's because I became a teacher. I see some of the struggles that he went through. I do remember my rookie year, even though I was in my 40s when I started teaching, and had management experience, which I was able to use. It If you get a classroom full of kids that you lose control of them early, you're not going to get that control. And it took Chips a while to do that, just as it did with me, and as it does with practically every new teacher. They have to learn how to gain that control and respect. Um, the love story, you know, I'm a
Yeah.
sucker for that stuff. Uh, I'm a sucker for dad and children's stories. And even though Chipping never becomes a biological father, he was like a father to these kids, as he said at the end. And I'm a sucker for that stuff. But if you just want to see a really nice story where there's no bad guys and just people, I just enjoy being around these people for the couple of hours that this movie is. And it's a fairly short movie, I believe. Uh, um, it's just a pleasurable way to spend,
Yeah, it's just shy under 2
yeah,
hours, I think.
and I always have a good time when I see it. Now there was a remake in 1969 with Peter O'Toole and Petula Clark where they had turned it into a musical. I have not,
Yeah, I saw
I
that.
have not seen it, and from what I understand, I don't want to see it. I don't want anything to taint my memory of this film. Uh, uh, so I've heard that it's not Peter O'Toole's best finest moment. But Robert Donat, obviously, this is the only movie that
Oh
I'm
gosh.
familiar uh, with him from. As I understand it, well, obviously he's an Englishman,
Oh,
but
okay.
he came to Hollywood for a little while, didn't like it here. Plus, he had severe asthma, and uh, so he didn't do a whole lot of movies. But he was also a very fine stage actor in England, and so. But I am so glad that he
Hmm.
gave us this movie.
Yeah, it's really good. I really enjoyed it. I'm glad that you recommended it. Did you already what's your pitch for the movie? Like how would you describe it to someone that might have never heard of it and is just getting into it?
Well, for me, is when I need a good man cry. This is one of the ones I put on. If uh,
I love it.
and sometimes we just have to clear those emotions out. Um, No, it's the performances are wonderful. Are wonderful. The performances are wonderful. It's got a neat look to it, even though it's very old looking. It captures a time and place that really doesn't exist anymore, and again the relationships. Uh, Even though it is a series of short vignettes, the relationships are real. The relationship between Chips and his friend Stossel, and of course the Chips and Catherine. And then later on, I mean, almost back to back, you see the headmaster trying to force Chips out, and then the next scene is supposed to be several years later, and the headmaster said, "Hey, I almost messed up when I just tried to get this man to retire early." Uh, you know,
Yeah,
he's just a neat person to get to know and to watch grow.
I agree. I agree. Yes, very much so. Well, John, it's a pleasure as always. Always love having you on, and when we talk, it's like no time has passed. So thank you again for
Yeah,
coming on.
I
And
can't think of a better way to spend a
oh,
Monday evening.
absolutely, I love having you on, and hope to have you back soon.